Hey, this is Bunny. We're here today to learn to paint bone. So I have this little guy here. Now he's actually a cow skull. A decrepit cow from a swamp kit or something. I don't remember. But that's what he is. He's supposed to be a cow or something. And we are going to learn how to turn this, which has already been primed, into something that looks kind of like bone. But we're going to do it simple, easy, not a lot of steps, something you can do at home without having to spend a lot of time, because none of us have time anymore. So to start, I'm going to apply white, a bright white. Now I don't often use bright white as a base. I usually tint it with another color, but in this case I am using bright white. And I know that doesn't look like bone. It's not supposed to yet. There are a couple of stages, so even though this is a quick and easy way to paint bone, there are still a couple of steps you have to use. So you want to start out with a color that is quite a bit lighter than the color you want to end up with, because you are going to end up putting a wash on top of this. And a wash will darken it considerably. So if you start out with the color you want, you're going to end up with a color that's too dark. So because we don't want to end up with a color that is too dark, we want to end up with the color that is just right for us. We are picking something a lot lighter than the color I'd like to end up with. And the color I'd like to end up with is an off-white dirty bone, because it's obviously crawled out of a swamp or something. So we don't want it to look too fancy, too dolled up, too pristine. So what I'm doing is picking something very pale though. So let's pretend these bones have already been bleached by the sun, and now they have gotten dirty. So when they've been bleached by the sun, they'll be fairly pale. They won't be bright white, but that's okay because I'm going to be applying other colors on top. So just make sure you get in all those grooves. Bones tend to have a lot of detail, especially if it's a skeleton like this one. There tends to be quite a lot of detail. And don't forget to get inside, because when it's sitting and you're looking at it as you're playing your campaign, if you don't get the insides of your skeletons, then you end up seeing that constantly, and it's going to drive you crazy. And you're going to absolutely regret not having done it. So make sure you get the insides of your skeletons, because trust me, you'll lose your mind if you forget. Okay, you completely lose your mind. So now I'm just going to paint this side, then I'm going to set it aside to dry until this area I've done has dried, because I have to be able to put it down. I have to put it down, and then I have to be able to hold it from the other end so I can paint this end of the skeleton. So we're just going to finish painting this front end of the skeleton. Then we will come back and we'll paint the back end, and then we will see how to turn a stark white painted skeleton into something with a little more color. So we'll be back when that dries. All right, now that is nice and dry. It needs to be completely dry to the touch, because you have to flip it around and start painting it from the other side. So let me just open up my palette here. And let me grab my brush, and we're going to continue painting it white. So again, I'm picking white because I want these bones to be kind of bright. So I'm going as light as I possibly can. You're gonna have to experiment a little bit. So I like using white for some bones, especially if I'm gonna darken them up by using different washes. I'm using 2 different washes on this one. So because of that, I need to make sure it's nice and bright, or it's going to look just dark and dingy, which is okay because it's a dead thing. I mean, dead things can be darker in color and be a little bit dark and dingy, but I still want some brightness. I still want this thing to stand out a little bit and not get lost in amongst all the other dark stuff that is usually in dungeons. So we're brightening him up by using white. So, little spot I missed in there. Check for any little spots you may have missed the time before. And when you're sure you're good, place him back down let him dry completely, and then we will come back and start adding different colors of washes just to bring him to life a little bit, because he's kind of one-dimensional right now. All right, our figure is completely dry, and he's looking very stark and bright. We need to take care of that. That's a little too bright. Now, I'm going to actually apply 2 different colors of washes. You can skip this middle step, but he is going to be something that I use crawling out of swamps or at the edges of rivers, so I don't want to just darken him up. I want to kind of make him look mossy or moldy, but I don't want it to be like completely obvious. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually taking a green wash, and I'm just putting a green wash over him. And because washes are very, very wet, I really need a little, there we go. I really need a little bit of paper towel under them. But what I'm going to do is just take the wash and go over him so that it sinks into the recesses. So this wash is fairly thick because I want, well, it's not super thick, it's medium, but I want it to stand out. I want him to look really mossy and gross and moldy. So I'm just going over pretty much every inch of him, including on the inside, to make him kind of moldy or mossy, however you want to say it. So let's just get the insides of him, because that's harder to get once he's standing up. Okay, now we're going to stand him up. When you're washing, it's a good idea to wash from the top down, just so things flow in the same direction as your light will flow. So we're just going to do this. And then we're going to come back and I'm going to do another wash. Now, if you just want your figure to look bony, like so no undertoning, no moss, no blood, nothing like that. If you just want to look like bare bone, then you would come in with a sepia or an umber wash or something like that. But because I do want him to have an undertone, we're going to do a little bit of green first. We will come back when that is 100% dry. If you are doing 2 layers of washes, you have to wait till they're dry. Because if I go and I put my umber wash on top of him now, it's going to be a disaster, because that umber will mix with the green and I'll get kind of this mucky brown instead of getting the green undertones. So if you're using 2 layers of wash, wait until that first layer is dry, which is what I'm going to do now. I am going to definitely 100% wait until that is completely dry. All right, so this little guy is now perfectly dry. What we're going to do now is we're going to add a darker wash. Remember, if you don't want the kind of moldy, mossy look, you would leave out the green. But I'm going to take a dark umber wash, so a very dark brown. See how dark that is? And I'm going to go over the green. Start on the inside, because it's way easier to get the inside when you can still turn them over. And work on that inside. And this wash is, I've thinned it out a little bit because I don't want to completely cover the green. I want the green to still come through, but I do want this darker brown on top of it. So we're thinning our wash out just a little and then coming over top. Remember, you can apply more than 1 coat of each color for a wash. So if you want to darken it up, it's better to thin your wash down and then add more later if you think it needs to be darker, rather than end up with something too dark now. And remember, if you're doing 2 layers of wash, you have to make sure that first layer is dry. Because if it's not dry, the problem you're immediately going to encounter is that they bleed together, and instead of seeing that green, you're just going to see a muddy color. Okay. Then I'm just going to rotate him so I can see the other side. There we go. So we're just going to put a lot of this umber wash on. And then I might do another coat of this umber wash, to make myself happy. We will see what it looks like when it's dry. You never really know what it's going to look like until it is completely dry. Okay, and if you don't like the way it looks, you just modify it. So if I want it darker afterwards, I'll just add darker washes. So you just get the wash on your brush, dip, let the wash settle into those grooves. Okay, that's what you're after. The wash settling into those grooves. You don't have to push it into those grooves because your wash is liquid enough to flow. So it does it itself. Just like that. So be gentle, slow. Make sure you're putting the wash exactly where you want it. And then let it flow into those grooves. There we go. That looks pretty good to me. So we're going to let that dry completely. Then we'll come back, see if we need another coat of wash. All right, off camera, I went and I added some black wash to this guy because I decided I wanted him to look like he was covered in moss and mold and mud. So I added a little bit of black wash on top of the green wash and the umber wash. If you don't want that kind of moldy, muddy look, then you might just use a sepia wash or an umber wash, depending on how dark you want it. Okay, and you also might start with a different base color. Remember, I started with white. You might decide to start with a bone color, or you might decide that you're going to start with a slightly darker color than I did. However, I'm not done with this guy. This guy's done. Okay, he's just the base color and a little bit of wash. He looks like fairly clean bone. This guy I didn't want to look clean. If you don't want him to look clean and you want to kind of layer these different washes, one of the things you can do now, so now that I have covered him in lots of wash, I can now re-highlight some of these higher pieces, some of these bones. I can do that by dry brushing. So to dry brush bone, you need a dry brush. Do not dip this in water. And then you want to take a very little bit of paint, very little bit of paint, very little bit, okay? And then you want to take that paint and you want to brush some of that off on a paper towel. You want very little paint. And then you do not want to go in the same direction as the bone. So the ribs on this guy go this direction. I don't want to go that direction. My brush will slip in between and I'll end up painting instead of dry brushing. Go the opposite direction of the pieces. So then you just very, very light. Remember, you can go darker if you want. Like you can go heavier with the dry brushing by adding a little more paint. It is always better to add less paint than more, because if you add less paint, you end up being able to go and fix it. If you add too much paint, if you're like, oh, that's too much. Okay, so we're just gonna, just some of these raised areas. I'm not gonna do the inside. I don't want those highlighted. So we're just highlighting with a little bit of dry brushing. We are not covering up what we've already done. Okay, we are not covering it. So you absolutely don't have to do the dry brushing. I'm not going to dry brush this guy. Him I'm leaving a much lighter bone color, and I just don't want to. I just don't want to dry brush him. I like the way he looks now. But dry brushing will kind of re-highlight some of those areas that in your washing may have ended up a little bit depressed. So now we're just going to turn him around, and we're just going to dry brush some of his head, just to re-highlight some of that head. And then you just kind of keep playing around until you're happy with the way he looks. Okay, so you can end up with something like this that's fairly clean bone, or you can do something like this where you have a lot darker, a lot murkier. Again, he's got like mold and muck on him, and I didn't want him to be super, super clean, because if he was super clean, he wouldn't look like some kind of marsh monster. So you just kind of play around with it until you like the look. Once you like the look, let him dry completely. We'll come back as soon as he's completely dry, and we'll take a look at our two side by side. Again, this guy is just one base color, one wash. This guy is a base color, 3 washes, and a dry brush. So let's see how he dries up. Okay, these guys are both nice and dry. So you have options when painting bone. You can go with something disgusting and grimy and looking like it just came out of a swamp by adding multiple layers of wash in different colors on top of your base color. Or you can opt for something smoother, cleaner, something you might see sitting on a desk looking quite fancy and ready for display. You would do that by using your base color and a single color wash. In this case, I used a sepia wash. Which you choose is up to you. It depends on the look you're going for. Just remember, if you are going for something like this, darker, gross, disgusting, start with a really light base color. I started with white. If you're going for something like this, where you're only going to use one color on top of your base, maybe choose a beige or a soft bone color, because otherwise it'll look too white. You don't want it too white. If you're going with very white, you're probably going to want to add a whole bunch of different layers just like this guy. But ultimately, it's up to you. You have to decide how you want your bone to look. I personally prefer this for more natural settings. This if we're looking at castles and other places where bones might be collected. But again, it's up to you. What are you trying to achieve? You only have to satisfy yourself. If you like the way it looks, then it's perfectly fine. Well, that is about it for us today. I hope you'll be back with us next time. Bye!